Now, how do you use more than one photograph together using a little bit of artistic license to make a watercolour wildlife painting? Let me give you some ideas on how I do that. Now, when I'm creating the painting, I very often prefer to use the one photograph. And that's because it gets quite complicated when you try to combine more than one photograph together. But sometimes I do that. Sometimes I tend to use more than one photograph. In fact, sometimes I've used probably 5 or 6 photographs to create a painting. So for example, this stoat I've just finished painting is actually from 2 different photographs. Now when I first saw this photograph on Pixabay, I thought, I'd like to paint that, It's quite a nice one to work from. But I wasn't that keen on the background where you got the long piece of wood there, which the stoat is emerging from, So I thought, I need to change that. But what can I have? So I looked at the angle of the wood within the photograph, thinking, okay, but it sort of goes that sort of angle, doesn't it? And I thought, well, what can I combine with that? Well, I could have a rock there behind the scenes, or in this case, I thought, let's have a fallen tree. So after plenty of searching on the internet, I found one fallen tree of a similar angle to the one in the photograph for the piece of wood that's obviously there. And I thought, well, I could probably use that. But then using an Arty program, which I've got on my computer, I was able to sort of combine the 2 photographs together, as you can see here. And then by doing so, that would then give me a general idea on how that will look as 2 photographs combined. I'm thinking, will that make a painting? Yeah, I think it will. But if you haven't got an Arty program on your computer, you can print photographs off and then combine them all together. But stay tuned, I'm going to show you all about that later on in this video. But you can see the idea when you're working with 2 different photographs and the way the stoat has come together. It works quite well, I think, on this one now. But I have had to change the colours within the fallen tree because it didn't quite work the way I wanted it to work. But that's the beauty about having a little bit of artistic license. Now, Stephanie White very kindly allowed me to use her photograph for this. But the only thing with the photograph is that the tree swallows was photographed coming out of a bird box. But I wanted a natural hole for these birds to come out of. And to do that, what I decided to do from that sort of drilled hole from the bird box is break it up. Break up all the edges and put little marks and dashes in between so it all looks broken like a natural hole. Think about the texture of bark, because we're trying to imagine this is like a hole in a tree. So by doing so, you've got the bark texture, quite random as well, coming away from that hole and then vertically down the tree as well. So you've got to think about the shape, you've got to think about the colours, and then by doing all of that, it's giving it more of a natural feel to that painting. Now, another good way of taking photographs with wildlife is having them in your hand. But this way you can get a really good close-up photograph even with your mobile phone. Be it something like a beetle, a butterfly, or even a bird. A bird? But yes, some birds will land on your hand. Depends how tame they are, of course. Also visiting wildlife areas, like for example a birds of prey centre. These sorts of places are really good opportunities to get some very detailed, cracking photos. Try to be on the same level as a wildlife you're photographing, at least that way around, the composition should work out quite well. But then you have to think, well, what can I replace that person's hand with? So consider the natural habitat for that wildlife you photographed, where you can replace, for example, somebody's hand with, say, a rock or a piece of wood or something like that. So try to consider what you can use instead of that person's, hand. Now, pied flycatchers are lovely birds to both watch and paint. Now, when I photographed this, I stood in the middle of a woodland, and the problem is it's going into yet another bird box, which is great for the pied flycatchers. It's giving them a home, somewhere to nest in, which is great, and it did do that. But the problem is when I want to create a painting from that, then again I've got an unnatural background, really. But what I did with this, I took a photograph of the neighbouring tree, which has got lots of vines on it, and lots of texture as well for the wood bark. And I thought, well, that will make a nice background for the main birds. So very similar to the tree swallows, I decided to create a hole instead of that bird box hole, to give it more of a sort of a natural feel to it. And then with the addition of the bark and those vines, to be honest with you, not many people would realise that that's a combination of 2 different photographs. Dormouse. I know, so cute. So I've used that C word, cute. Now, they are lovely to paint, they really are. Now, Amy Lewis allowed me to paint from this lovely photograph of hers. But the only thing is, it's in a hand. I wanted something more natural again. Something more, something more woodland-wise. So after a little bit of research, we found out that dormice tend to nest on the ground. And because of that, well, it's going to be something like leaf litter or anything, any vegetation they can find. So what I decided to do with that is take the hand away, go away, and then around the dormouse, think about different leaf shapes and grass stems, all them sort of things in between. And also consider the depth of the grass as well. So a lot of that is really made up. But by doing so, it's giving it more of a natural feel as well. The sort of thing you'll find out in the wild. But there's plenty of photo references on the internet for things like leaf litter, leaf shapes, grass, all that sort of thing. Or you can simply go outside yourself, go into a woodland and take a photograph of the woodland floor, and then see what you can find that's going to work with your painting. Now this one is a marsh tit, and I know it's very similar to the chickadee, isn't it? It really is. But the beauty about painting this one is that I painted the photograph more or less as it was, other than one thing. And that's because I baited the area with some bird seed, trying to bring the birds over so I can photograph them. But the problem with that is that, as you can see, it's got a seed in its beak. And I thought, well, that's not really natural, is it? Not that sort of seed. So what I decided to do with that is put a little worm in its mouth. Or in this case, a caterpillar. And I'm kind of guessing it might be something like an oak leaf caterpillar for that. And that seems to work better than having a seed in its beak, doesn't it? But that's again just by changing things around. Thinking, what can I have instead of that? How can I make it work? We've also got to consider the sort of food that bird might eat. But whether or not it could eat an oak leaf caterpillar, that remains to be seen. But for me, it still works as a painting. So if you decide you want to change something within your photograph, just do that background research first of all, to make sure there's something that would naturally happen in nature. Now, geckos are lovely creatures, aren't they? You can see all the lovely details within the body and the eye. But even though this is a really good photograph by Susan Back on Facebook, thank you Susan, the thing with this one is that I really want something natural for it to be on. So I decided with this one, I'm going to try and create some rock shapes in front of it. But for me, I think rocks work really, really well, and certainly better than somebody's hands. But by doing this, you've also got to think about shadows as well. So look at the way the shadows are on the gecko. And you can see really on the gecko, well, they're all over, aren't they? Because it's all completely lit. So I decided with that, I'm going to put some shadows underneath it to make it look like it's anchored to that rock. And by doing so, it's giving more of a kind of firm base as well, isn't it? If you don't put the shadows underneath the gecko or the subject you're painting, you find it could look like it's floating over the top. So make sure you get the shadows underneath to kind of anchor it down. But they're the processes I went through to be able to paint this lovely gecko. Now, one of the birds I like to paint quite a lot is the nuthatch. Lovely looking bird they are, aren't they? And they're very athletic as well in the way they tend to sort of hang upside down on a tree. Now, when I photographed this one, the nuthatch was on a peanuts bird feeder. And I thought, again, it's not natural, is it? Not what you normally see a nuthatch on. So I said, what can I do with this? But we know that nuthatches tend to hang onto a tree. So I decided to, well, let's change the peanut feeder for a tree instead. So this one, what I've done, I made up the details as I've gone along. And you can see I've actually decided to think about the shape of the tree instead. We've also got to consider where the claws and the feet go with this, because you've got to think about, well, then claws are kind of hooked into the metalwork of the bird feeder, aren't they? So with that, when I'm working on this, I'm thinking about, well, if that claw goes behind that little bit of bark there, like a gap in a bark, that sort of thing, then you can actually get away with that. Where can the claw go to, where you can hide it? Because it might be inside the peanuts, for all we know, inside that feeder. And then you've got to think about the shape of the bark as well, and also the texture of the bark. But think about where the light is on that bird as well. It's going to anchor that bird to the tree, just like we spoke about before. And the beauty about painting bark is that you can make it up as you go along. Now, it's often easier to get photos on bird feeders. But substituting that for something a little bit more natural. Because the thing is, you don't want to waste that really good quality photograph for the sake of peanuts and fat balls, do you? Now, this is one of the cutest birds we have here in the UK. It's called the long-tailed tit. And it's a beautiful little bird, it really is. The thing with this one is you can see it's on a fat ball. And when it's on a fat ball, it's again not natural, is it? No, it's not. So I've got to really think about the shape of that, because you can see that the angle of the fat ball curves around, as obviously it's round. And because I've got to think, well, how on earth am I going to think about a shape or something for it to stand on? We can have a branch, but look at the way the claws are clinging to that fat ball. So again, you've got to think, well, I can't have it too thin, the branch. We've got one foot which has disappeared around the back of that as well. So I decided what I'm going to do with this is create more of a curved branch feel to it, because you get all sorts of different shaped branches, don't you? And by doing that, I can think about, where those areas where the claws are going to go into disappear. And you can see what I've done with that one as well, especially the back leg, which has gone around the back of that branch. So thinking about the shape, thinking about the texture, and also where the claws are going to be grabbing that woodwork to hold on to it. And that's how I created this one. All through using artistic license, of course. Now, the sparrowhawk is a regular visitor to our back garden. It really is, I know. Beautiful birds of prey, they really are. The only thing with this one, as you can see, it landed on a bird bath. Yeah, I mean, you could paint it on the bird bath if you wanted to. But again, me being me, I wanted something a little bit more natural than a bird bath, than a block of concrete. Now, fortunately for us, in our back garden, we've actually got an old tree stump. I know, would you believe it, of all things? So, because of that, I decided to photograph it and use that as a main perch for the sparrowhawk. So, because we've already got a photograph I can work from, I can work on similar details. I can work on the sort of shape which I want. I can work on the colours as well. And also the texture. Depends on obviously the type of what it is, will depend on the texture which you paint. I'm also considering the light direction as well, because that's very, very important. So therefore, the dark side on a tree stump has got to be on that left-hand side as well. Think about the light source, think about where the light's coming from. So, so important. Now, I mentioned earlier on about the fact that if you haven't got the artist software on your computer, where you can kind of amalgamate two photographs together and change things around, or you haven't got the know-how or the technology to do so, what you can do is actually print off lots of photographs, which I've done, of various sizes, think about size relation as well, to work by combining all them together to make a painting. Now, because I decided to paint 5 different birds for this painting, I wanted to make sure that all the birds are within the UK. So it all sort of gels together. But you can do the same for where you live as well, of course you can. Think about, say, 5 different birds, which you often see within your backyard, garden, whatever, around where you live. And put them together. Find out the rough sizes of said bird, okay, and compare them together. And then at least you've got some general idea if that bird should be a little bit smaller than that one that you print off. Once you've printed them off to the size that you want, then you've got to think about, well, I'm going to arrange them on the paper. Cut them out with a pair of scissors. Just remember to do lots of testing first of all by repositioning your printouts, your cutout printouts, all over your watercolour paper and working out roughly where you want them to be. Now, if you're interested in learning how I painted a 5-bird montage, I'll pop that link on the screen for you now. Now, once you've got them in position and you've got them marked out where you want them to go, pencil lines across the edges of the printout onto the watercolour paper, very lightly though, so you can erase them afterwards. Then slide some graphite back paper underneath so you can transfer through them, or you can just get a bit of charcoal or a bit of soft pencil lead underneath the printout, underneath it, stick it down and then draw over the top to transfer it through. Once you've got all that drawn out, then you're ready to make a start on the painting. Now, I have to admit that birds are my favourite thing to paint because there's so many shapes, sizes, colours out there within the wide world, isn't there? So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pop a little link to the top right hand corner there for you, give you an idea on how to paint a bird. I'll see you there.